Welcome, everybody. I just felt like doing a live today because there's a whole lot of different things going on, and there's basically a lot of mis and disinfo, and I wanted to talk about that. Not only the real life dis and misinfo, but also how it happened in my documentary. I'm going to relate it in the hypotheticals as well as in real life. Well, in the hypotheticals, as everybody knows who watched it, there was basically different factions, and they all had their own methods and means of propaganda dissemination. So, what's going on right now is you see a lot of different people that are disseminating information. Some of it's correct and some of it's incorrect. For example, you have people saying crazy things and that have said crazy things about what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. Like people saying that Russia's going to use or destroy a nuclear power plant that's in a country that's like right next to them, or use nukes in a country that's like right next to them, which is totally asinine and makes absolutely zero sense. We all know, those of us who are actually paying attention to the facts, that Russia is not hurting. They're not hurting one bit. Actually, the sanctions boomeranged and hurt the West. Russia's actually experiencing economic growth. Now, don't get it twisted. I'm not for Russia. I'm just speaking facts about the situation at hand. The facts are that Russia did a limited incursion with some roughly 70 battalions or so of troops, 70 or so odd battalions of troops. That's not a very big force because they had a limited incursion with limited objectives. Their objectives, basically, in their own words, were to go into the Donbass and seize it for themselves. Just that one region. They were going to go in there. They were going to protect the ethnic Russians, as they said. This is their words now. It's not mine. It's their words. And they were going to basically ensure that there was going to be no further Ukrainian attacks on the Donbass because they wanted to demilitarize Ukraine and denazify it. That's their words, not mine. Their words. So, what did we see? Well, little by little, different evidence was released, factual evidence that, in fact, there were such types of people within that nation that they were fighting, okay? Now, they sent in a very small force. They had proxies there, too, that they had already armed and militarily trained, called the DPR and LPR forces, okay? Stay with me now. So, they were locally outnumbered, and they've managed to grind down the Ukrainian armed forces, which is a hell of a feat for being outnumbered some 10 to 1 in the local area. Now, the Russian armed forces as a whole, we know, including their paramilitary, is 3.5 million in size. So some 70 battalions, what is that? That's like 63 to 65,000 troops, okay? That's not a very big force, all right? That means, and Russia hadn't mobilized all of their reserves. They've only mobilized some of their reserves that comprise a large portion of that 3.5 million force. Because remember, their paramilitary forces, which they now renamed the National Guard, they used to call it their internal troops. There were some 300,000 troops, okay? That's their internal forces, their paramilitary, their parallel military forces. They also had a large reserve force of some roughly 2 million, okay? The 1.2 million was their active duty military, which they primarily used active duty forces in their invasion, their limited incursion. It was not a full-scale invasion now, so They had only used some 5% of their entire conventional military forces. No, they're not going to destroy a nuclear power plant unless all the fissile material has been removed from it. Why would they? That makes absolutely no sense. Why would they destroy a nuclear power plant that is full of the fuel rods that would contaminate a large portion of Russia right next door? That makes no sense. That is the most senseless, most asinine thing I've ever heard in my life. You have people that are totally talking out of their ass right now, saying ludicrous things like that make absolutely no logical, coherent, rational sense. They're not losing. If they were losing, they would be doing more conventional things than what they've committed, okay? Think about it. You commit 5% of your entire armed forces and they ground down a force that outnumbers them 10 to 1. They're down to using old men. Ukraine is losing. They're losing badly. They're losing badly. They could have collapsed last month. They could have collapsed last month. It is a testament, though, to their bravery that they continue to hold out, but they have badly lost this war. As Gonzalo Lira even put it, it's all over but the shouting. What you're seeing, meaning is what you're seeing, is just the noise. It's just noise. It's basically all, it's in the bag. It's over. It's done. You're just watching the death throes of a dying regime, of a dying nation, Ukraine. Look, you have people that are totally just talking a bunch of BS. They take lies from Western media and other media. All media lies. It doesn't matter if it's Russian media. See, when the Russian media says that they're going to nuke people, that's the media talking. That's their talking heads speaking. That's not official. They don't run Russia. That's not an official standpoint. That's not their official stand that they're taking. That's their talking heads saying that in Russia. Totally ludicrous. If people are going by what media talking heads say or what editorials that they write say, then you're a lost cause. That's not going to happen. They don't write the policies for the Russian armed forces. Hate to tell you, folks. No, the Russian general staff who takes orders from their leaders, from their regime, they're the ones that set policy, not talking heads in the media. So whatever media stories, whether it's Russian or Western, that you're reading about that situation, it's all a bunch of bullshit and hype, and it's not going to happen like that. Not unless there's some sort of a FF event, like a false flag Rooney and cheese. Now, if they did something like that, that would be totally concocted by black ops type of forces. Otherwise, in no official capacity would Russia do something so reckless and stupid that would hurt them like that. That would hurt them. It would reverberate to the point to where it affects their land. Don't people understand that southern Russia is a large grain producing area that produces a lot of their food? Do people not understand that if they would do something like that, that would contaminate their crops? Does that make any sort of logical, coherent, rational sense? They're not going to use nuclear weapons in a conflict they're winning either. It's a limited incursion. They haven't even expanded it in conventional terms yet, which they still have as an option. They've barely used any air power since the whole stupid thing began. I've told people, this is a distraction. It is a distraction. So this goes back to my original point. This is media hype and propaganda. There's different types, and we're seeing a lot of it right now. We're seeing agitation propaganda. We're seeing a lot of hype propaganda. Hype hyped up stories, stories that are made to agitate and inflame and infuriate and things like that. That's why you see all these overreach. They're basically psyop productions of different overreach going on. It's there to piss people off, or it's there to use as fear propaganda. Fear can also be a goal of these propagandists. A lot of this is fear, hype, distraction, agitation, and inflammation propaganda. Do not believe it. Don't believe anything that comes out of the Western media, Russian media, Chinese media, because media is a bunch of liars. They're liars, all of them. Eastern and Western media, they lie. That's all they do, is come up with lies and bullshit and hype. They're not sitting in these closed meetings where there's military officers conducting strategy and war planning and other types of things that are done in an official capacity. You do not have these media people sitting in on those things. Very seldom, if ever, is that allowed. And even when it's allowed, it is highly strictly controlled. It is controlled. So when you see media people creating these editorials, these junk articles, these they sit down in these little media shows and you see the talking heads talking about this BS. That's all it is, folks. You have to use rational, logical thinking. You have to use rational, logical thinking to be able to discern what is a lie and what is not a lie. So that's just talking about the whole situation in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia. You know, that there's a lot of hype and junk narratives, folks, narratives being, projected, perpetuated. And I have to speak against the narratives. I have to kick these narratives in the balls because it's a bunch of BS and hype. It's hype. Ukraine is a distraction. It is nothing more than a black hole by which is we are being robbed of our treasure, our arms, our equipment. Just everything is going in there. Even capable mercs that could have helped rebuild our shattered, depleted, woke, garbage, demoralized current armed forces. When I was in the armed forces, it was not like it is today. We used to be something. We used to be a professional military. We used to have what we needed. We used to be well stocked. We used to be able to, deploy all around the world with very little problems. Now, we depend solely, damn near, on foreign imports of fuel. Militaries cannot operate without fuel. So when we are cut off and we now lack the domestic production capabilities that we once had, because those have been largely neglected or destroyed purposely, where does that put us? I'll tell you where it puts us. It puts us in a very, very nasty situation. A very nasty situation. So now, back to how I was going to equate this to my work I've done. The different factions all had different propaganda dissemination methods. Now, the best types of propaganda that people can use is propaganda that is largely based on fact, on truth. Because even the truth can be used as a propaganda tool or a propaganda weapon. Now, when I talk about the factions, say you have your NSRF faction. What they did in their propaganda was they did use a lot of truth. They did. They used a lot of truth about globalism and everything to whip people into a frenzy. But they spun in their own narrative that they were crusading against globalism. It was a crusade against globalism. So when you are able to tell the truth, but but then you were also able to spin in your own take on it, your own narrative in with the truth. That becomes a potent form of propaganda. Now, you also have the religious propaganda that the Mormon state used. Now, the reason why that was so effective is because you had a state that was largely Mormon. It was largely Mormon. So, when you have the fringe elements taking over the Mormon church, what were they able to do? Well, they were able to use the truth as well, but they tied their truth, the actual happenings, and they spun it to create a narrative saying that it was the end times prophecies of Joseph Smith coming to pass. Well, what did that do? You had the devout Mormons, or even just regular Mormons, seeing the truth because it was being spread with the sermons that Josiah, Supreme Acolyte Josiah, and Grand Acolyte Mordecai, and the Council of Elders, they created and spread it. But they spun in their religious take on it, and that became a potent form of propaganda by which they subverted the mainstream of Mormonism. So propaganda can be subversive, or it can be used as a weapon. A weapon. It can be used as a weapon to agitate, to inflame, to strike fear into your enemies, or it can be used to whip up, your own people into a gung-ho sort of, attitude. Propaganda can work both ways. It's a double-edged sword. It can, it can work to, motivate people, or it can work against your enemies. Like, in China, they talk about meeting the quota, and they have all these propaganda posters of the Chi-Com worker, of the Chi-Com, perfect communist worker. And he has his big sledgehammer, and he's breaking rocks or whatever they have him doing, or he's this larger than life, worker in a factory welding something, and he's this big stocky, Chinese guy. I mean, that type of imagery evokes a sort of like motivation, like, yeah, let's meet the quota, let's get this work done. Like, that's the purpose of propaganda. It's there to influence the mind. There's a battle for the mind. Now, in the Western nations, like for instance, with the whole issue with Ukraine, back to that, you have Western media sources trying to, turn the Western populations, and turn them to where they're for supporting this proxy nation against Russia, this Ukraine, okay? So they're motivating people to support what's going on there. Like, oh yeah, we got to arm these people. We got to send them money and this and that. But in reality, all that's doing is hurting us. We have no way to replace what we shell out and give away. We have no way to replace that. We're suffering here at home, and we have all these problems here at home. When overseas, they're giving all our stuff to these people. Like, what is going on with that? You got tent cities in our cities springing up. You've got collapse and signs of decay and just collapsed factories that no longer are filled with the machinery or the workers. They're just sitting there empty, just falling apart, dilapidated. And meanwhile, they're giving away what we do have to a black hole for nothing. We're not getting anything for that, folks. We just fought 2 long wars in the Middle East and Central Asia, because Afghanistan's in Central Asia and Iraq's in the Middle East. We fought 2 very long wars, and we got nothing as a nation for it, other than losing our blood, sweat, and treasure. I mean, that's all we got for it. That's it. We've gained nothing. It's weakened us, as a matter of fact. It's weakened just the whole character of what this nation was and stood for, because we were there for the wrong reasons. It depleted our forces over time. It left our nation with a bunch of wounded people or psychologically broken people. I mean, I'm talking about the people that went there and saw the truth of what it was, or they had to do unfortunate, unpleasant things to other people. I mean, I had to. I feel tremendous guilt for it. But I was injured as well, and all of that happened to so many people. It happened to so many people. And when you have a bunch of people like that coming home, and they have to come home to a place like this, and nobody understands what happened or what we dealt with, and you have a bunch of people that turn to self-medicating because they don't know where else to turn, and it just creates problems in a society. It weakens your society. It weakens your morals, your society, everything. Everything. So, propaganda is alive and well, and we see it all the time. We see these big pogo channels that push a bunch of BS narratives and garbage. I mean, that's propaganda. They go after small channels that tell the truth because they don't like anybody that challenges the narrative. So propaganda isn't just something that happens in war. Propaganda happens everywhere. It happens everywhere. It happens in peacetime. It happens to fulfill some sort of a purpose. And again, some propaganda uses the truth, while other propaganda is downright just flat out lying. But the best propaganda of all propaganda is always based on truth. Like, okay, for instance, in World War II, when it became apparent that the fascists, I'll just say, they had death camps and everything like that, and they were, committing genocide and acts of barbarism. Well, that was the truth, but that often got used in propaganda. Like, we're fighting a righteous war to eliminate these evil fascists that, murder and torture and starve people. That was an instance of spinning in the truth, and it was true because look, when I was a foreign exchange student, I went to Germany as a foreign exchange student. We got to take a class trip to Buchenwald. We went to Buchenwald in Thüringen. Thüringen is a state in eastern central Germany. It's next to Hessen. Hessen is where we landed in Frankfurt am Main Flughafen, which is their international airport. And we, one of them. We went. Frankfurt is the third biggest international airport in all of Europe. So we went from Frankfurt to Bad Kreuznach, which was where we stayed as exchange students. That was like the municipality that we stayed with our host families in. But we got to travel Germany. We got to take their bullet train, the ICE, or the ICE train. It was ICE, but ICE is how you would say that in the German alphabet. We took the ICE train, which was their bullet train. We took it from westernmost Germany, which is where, Rhineland-Pfalz is, their state of Rhineland-Pfalz. We went through Hessen, and then we stopped in Thüringen. We went to Eisenach first, and then we went to Weimar. Now, outside of Weimar, like if you all remember the Weimar Republic, the city of Weimar is the city that is closest to Buchenwald. So we went to Buchenwald, and that sure is a real place. That sure is a real place, and real atrocities happened there. You can still see where they did medical experiments on people. There's still dried blood on the table. It was like a concrete and tile. It had tile for the part where they made people lay on it and do vivisectomies and things like that on them. You could sure see the dried blood on that table. You could sure go down to where they had meat hooks where they hung the dead bodies of people that died before burning them in the ovens. So that's an example of a righteous crusade. You're fighting fascism, these people that commit these horrible atrocities, okay? So, man, it's just so much BS and lies going on. And that's the type of propaganda that you're seeing a lot of right now. That you're seeing a lot of right now. So in the hypotheticals, back to that, again, you had different ideologies cropping up, different groups. They all had their own different agendas, their own goals, their own ideologies, and they all were competing for control, or they wanted to be independent. Now, a lot of the factions that were moderate factions, like they weren't brutal. They didn't commit really any atrocities, except for like the occasional rare, because it happens in war. It doesn't matter how tame and civilized your side is. Every now and then, people commit battlefield atrocities, things like that. It happens in war. It happens. So, despite the fact that you had, your rare, instances of that, you had a lot of tame and civil factions. You did. You had a lot of tame and civil factions. Like you had Texas was very civilized. You had Florida, who was very civilized. You had these guys; they were civilized. Union of Southwest Militia. So was the Northwestern Conservative Army and the Maine Militia. Now, La Raza narco state, the Mormon state, and these guys here, the NSRF, and the regime were the four most brutal factions. But the one faction that was big, but it was civilized, was the Free American Army, who wanted to put the country back under the Constitution. So they all had different aims, different objectives, Their propaganda would have been pro, nationhood, secessionism. Same with theirs, These guys were pro Southern secessionism, and they were against globalism. These guys, even though they were against globalism, they wanted the whole nation united, But these guys, they were very brutal. Their propaganda was ultra-nationalist oriented. It was against globalism because it was diametrically opposed to globalism. It was a very, very interesting set of circumstances. And you had these guys, they didn't really have much in the way of propaganda, but they just wanted more of their people to come there. So theirs was oriented with that. They also had, the regime had its globalist propaganda. These guys had their, basically the Union of Southwest Militias had their, pro-confederation of communities oriented propaganda. Theirs was very libertarian oriented. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted local rule, but they wanted like a confederation where everybody worked together, but they ruled their own affairs locally, at the local level, so people would have more of a say in what was going on. Same with the Maine militia, and you have all these things happening in a conflict. You have the different sides colliding and their propaganda colliding. So, that there was different means by which they would attack one another with their propaganda. Now, these guys used a lot of truth propaganda. Even they did. Even the Free American Army did to an extent. Now, they had to make propaganda based on lies, the regime, because they knew that everybody was sick of them. So they had to make propaganda based on total lies, based on globalist-oriented goals, So they had the support of their globalist forces, but towards the end of it, when people were starving, when they were tired of fighting for them, like the woke militias and the people in their areas, they ended up having to turn on their own people and use nerve gas on their own people, like I mentioned in the documentary, because their propaganda wasn't working anymore. Because everybody, even in their territory, they saw through it, and they saw that a lot of it was lies, because they were they were basically fighting for a lost cause because they were fighting for nothing. They ended up as slaves because remember their money was worthless. So the forces that fought for them, because they were still using the collapsed money, the forces that fought for them were essentially fighting for food and water. So they were slaves, you know. So you had not propaganda doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. You still have to have an element of some sort of stability or truth for propaganda to even be effective, the way it is. Because for propaganda to really work the way it's intended, you have to have the people in a state where they're happy about whatever they're underneath, and they have to be willing to support it. They have to be willing to support it. Now, when you have people in a collapsed system, in a failing system, the propaganda isn't going to work like it's intended. Not really. So you're going to have these factions who have more effective means of propaganda because they can use the truth in their favor. Even a brutal force like the NSRF or the Mormon state, their propaganda would work to their favor because they can use the truth and manipulate it by spinning in their own respective narratives to make the people support them in the scenario. I'm just talking about in the scenario. So, that's you have it, and you have layers of propaganda as well. You have it working in multiple layers. You have different methods of dissemination. Like these guys, they used a lot of radio. They used pirate radio. They used posters. They used leaflets. They used, different means by which to disseminate it. These guys used religious sermons. They used sermons, and they had overseas Mormon state video accounts. Because remember, the regime shut down the internet. They shut down the net at the beginning. So, you had different means by which it was disseminated. Now, when the internet shut down, a lot of radio was used, and also primitive posters and leaflets and even memory sticks, because though there was still power in some areas and you could still technically get on a computer, you would have to use a memory stick because the internet was shut down in the country by the regime, by the globalist regime. So you had different means by which it's disseminated, and you had individuals who were like spin doctors or whatever you want to call them. They were propagandists who would create narratives and relay it to their front men who would conduct the radio programs or whatever. You had that. So propaganda works in different ways. You have different means by which it can be disseminated. Now, if you go back to the times we're in now, you have instances where you have, your pogo channels. They are mis and disinfo agents whose sole entire purpose is to go out there and, spin different narratives. They're handed narratives and they're told to work around those narratives, and they do so. And they're also told to send their agents to attack smaller channels. Now, I made videos addressing that one shill, and we know who it is. And apparently this one shill is still on the attack against me. Go figure. But he's still on the attack against me. It's always a no name, no face, no content sort of actor who goes around, and they're all like this. I've been attacked by 2 shills. One actually had the nerve to call me a shill, which is hilarious because I'd love to see how that could be. Like, what's the reasoning behind that? Like, how could I be a shill? Like, I don't do anything but help people. I'm just an ordinary guy. I'm just some asshole who has a camera on a cell phone. I make my own drawings, and I make hypothetical documentaries. How am I a shill? Like, that's hilarious. That's funny. It is. It's kind of funny. But it's like you got people out there, these bad actors, they're scared to ever show their face and their real name. They don't ever use their real name, real face, but they go around trying to spread dis and misinfo about real people. It's always smaller channels. They don't ever attack big channels. You ever notice that? Anyone ever notice that? They always attack the small channels because they don't want anybody who's like grassroots, popping up and, sharing anything with people, I mean, they don't want that. They don't want free speech. They don't want people using their free speech to share information with other people. They hate that. They hate that. They want you to feed from their trough. They want you to feed from their trough like a pig or something, or a sheep, whatever. They want you to feed from their trough. They want you to come to them for everything, because those are the real spin doctors. These big pogo channels. We all know one. We all know one specifically. I made a playlist dedicated to it. You all can go watch it. There's a lot of good information in that playlist. See, those types of things are real. That's really happening. So there's different propaganda, mis and disinfo agents. Now these little agents, these pogo agents, these little no name, no face people that run around and talk bad about other people for no good reason. They have no real legitimate reason. They just make stuff up, and they just go around and say stuff about people and slander them and libel them and gossip on them because they're paid to do that. They're paid. They're paid agents. They're paid. They're paid to do that. There is a Chinese and Russian 50-cent army, just like there's an American POGO, privately owned government-operated channel. There's different means and different dis and misinfo agents that go around and spread their dis and misinfo, which is why people have to learn how to think for themselves, how to use rational, logical, coherent thought, and question everything. Question everything. You see, everything. People that talk bad about other people for these propaganda agents, they have to have a motive. Well, what is their motive to just talk bad about people? It's money. It's money. They're being paid to do it. I don't ever ask for money. You don't see me up here doing nothing for no money. I don't even talk about it. I don't care. I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart. Ain't nobody paying me to do nothing. So a shill is somebody who's paid to be a mis or disinfo agent. That's what a shill is. And these no-name, no-face bad actors are propaganda. They're a form of propaganda because they're there to continue perpetuating a narrative by trying to shut down people who are trying to share truthful information with people. That's their whole entire purpose. I mean, I'm low-budget history channel over here. I'm the low-budget history channel. I've got documentaries. That's what I do here. I talk about facts. I talk about figures. Talk about capabilities. I talk about all of that through the delivery of documentary hypotheticals. That's what this is. That's what I do here. It's all hypothetical. So, I use that as a means by which to share factual information. I share factual information through hypothetical scenarios, through documentaries, through storytelling. I share factual information. It's a creative way. It's a creative way to share factual information with people. It's a creative way. So anybody who has a problem with that, I seriously question their motives, because why would you have a problem with that? Why would anyone have an issue with that? Who would take issue with anybody who, out of the goodness of their heart, comes on here to help other people? Why would anyone have a problem with that unless they themselves are being paid to do it? Why are they so scared to use their real names and show their real faces ever? I've shown my real face, my real name, this is me. Why are they so scared to show their real names, real faces? Why do they lurk in the shadows and start BS threads talking a bunch of shit about people they know nothing about? They know nothing about. Why are they doing that? Because they're being paid. They're paid shills, folks. That's what shills do. Anybody who's talking bad about another person for no good reason, you seriously have to question their motives. Sort of like that Watchman or Trust No Man, Geo Helu, well, whatever his name is. That's a bad actor. That's a shill. That's a shill. That's a shill, 100%. Otherwise, what is their motive? Why would they do that? Why would they do it? Why? It makes no sense. Makes no rational, logical, coherent sense. They're either a paid shill or they're severely mentally ill. Why would you change your name and also have over a dozen, or over half a dozen, I should say, to a dozen profiles? Why? And you're not even a content creator. You don't even create content. Why? Why so many channels? Why would you change your name and picture so many times like that? It's a little weird, a little strange, a little kooky. Sounds like a shill, or it's somebody that took the beast mark and they're thus severely mentally ill from it because their brain's corroding inside of their skull. You know. So I've been told this person is still on the attack against me. Okay. You keep right on doing that, Shillington out there. Shillington. Everybody knows who you are by now. Everybody knows what you're up to and what you're into. You and your occult BS. You're no Christian. You hang out on occult channels too, which is crazy. You know why? But yet you claim you're a Christian. Get out of here, man. Just get lost. Get off of YouTube. You're a jerk off. I'm just gonna call it like I see it. You're a jerk off. So, propaganda. These shills are part of propaganda. They're every bit a part of it. They're employed. They're paid to do that. And I've related now how propaganda works and why it's done. It's done to influence the minds of the people. Well, let me see who's all in here. I'm going to start interacting with the audience. Been talking a while. So what's everybody doing? Oh, yeah, baby. Hey, Jennifer. Yeah, it's Planet of the Apes. These people are dumb apes. These shills and bad actors, they're stupid apes. It's all they are. It's all they're ever going to be. They can't think for their own. They're just a bunch of charlatans. They get paid by these big channels to go after small channels. That's what Pogo is. The 50-cent army of China and Russia, they pay people to do that too. They pay people for every paragraph or sentence, I think, that they type about somebody that's negative. That's what they do. Yep. Let's see what everybody's saying here. Hey, Angry Scandinavian, what's up, man? Yeah, I wouldn't trust them either, Angry Scandinavian. They're known to get into accidents. It's affecting their central nervous system. It's affecting their central nervous system and their circulatory system. They could have a stroke or they could, have like seizures or whatever that would cause them to, cause them to wreck, or they can't pay attention. They lose their attention span. So they're very dangerous, I know all about what seizures are like. I mean, I have them due to my head injury from Iraq. So, those are very dangerous. I almost had a wreck on the interstate, and I haven't driven since. I haven't driven since because I'm responsible enough to know that that's endangering not just myself but other people. So I don't drive anymore. I could have renewed, but I'm not going to renew my license. It's too dangerous. Yeah, I know you're real, Jeffrey. I know you're real. I know who shills are and who ain't. Real ones. I know how to identify them, Jeffrey. You're not no shill. I know that. Yep. Real shills, they hide and they don't ever have any content. They don't do anything other than talk bad about other people, badmouth people. That's all they do. Because they're paid to do it. Let's see. Hey, Kathy. Well, he's just a puppet, Kathy. That's all he is. He's no different than any of the other ones. He's just a puppet. Yeah, Russia's winning, man. Russia's winning, like, very much so. And Ukraine is losing badly. They've been losing. They've been ground down gradually. They're fixing to be surrounded completely in their pocket, and they're going to end up starving or they're going to have to surrender in the Donbass, which is where most of their armed forces currently are. Whatever's left of them, I should say. Whatever's left of them. That's why they have to use old men in so many other sectors, because all their best, forces are trapped almost in the Donbass. They really can't go anywhere. They're stuck in their fortifications. If they were to try to flee, they would get like carpet munition because they could be seen. They could be seen from the air if they tried to retreat. They're having a hell of a time getting logistics out to these people. You see all the videos that get, sent out of there. You see how desperate things are for them. I mean, if you've seen enough of those, you can sort of get the general gist of what it's really like on the ground, because it's not just one or two. I mean, we're talking like hundreds of videos from different parts of that sector, and you see how bad it is for them. They're getting like rocketed and shelled like 24/7 damn near. It's not looking good for them. It hasn't been. They could have collapsed in July or had a coup, or the regime could have fled from Kiev. I mean, look, anything can happen at any time. Anything can happen at any time. I'm expecting it to collapse pretty soon here. Russia don't need to. That's the most retarded thing I've ever heard anybody say. Russia doesn't even need to do what these people are saying, using nukes or blowing up some power plant in Ukraine. That's never going to happen. They don't need to do that. They're winning. They're winning. That's the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard anybody say. But what you have, folks, is you have people that don't know anything about how militaries operate, and they want to talk about wars and things, but they don't even know the first thing about how militaries work. They don't understand the mechanics of them. They don't understand how logistical systems work. They don't know none of that, because they've never served or they've never studied it to the extent that others have. They don't know about it. I know about it firsthand, and I know about it from studying it most of my life. Most of my life, I've always been fascinated by the armed forces and how it works, and then the armed forces from around the world. I've studied this stuff extensively. That's why I know so much about it. See, these other people, they get into talking about these things, and they have no clue about it. They just go off of what media sources say. They just parrot media narratives, and it's ludicrous. It's not how it is at all. It's not how it is at all. The media knows as much about the armed forces as, like, some Joe Blow could. I mean, they don't know anything either. They just make stuff up because they're given scripts to read. They're given a script by a propagandist, that from some unknown, special interest group or a what do you call those things? Like these, elitist think tanks, like these elitists, these like Bilderberg or whoever. They'll send them a script, and the media people just read it. These media stories are largely concocted. They're just concocted. They don't really include any facts. I've even seen a while back, somebody sent me a video where they tried to, where the whole thing started in Ukraine, and they were trying to do a media report. It was a Western media source, and when it showed images from Star Wars in it. It was like a quick flash of a Star Wars image, like in, I think it was The Empire Strikes Back. They took an image of the battle that happened in Empire Strikes Back on the ice planet, and they put it in there with like images of like military forces. It was really fast. If you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it. But somebody sent me that. Man, that just goes to show you how much bullshit that media is. You can't read media articles or anything like that, because half of it isn't true anyway. Half of it isn't true. And some of the media stories, whether it's Western or Russian or Chinese, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter. Any official media sources are going to lie to you, either partly or completely. Some of the stories that come out of like mainstream media are entirely made up, like totally fabricated. You can't trust it. It's like pure propaganda. But it's the worst kind of propaganda because it's lies. It's lies. It has like no truth in it, or very, very little. Just enough to where they can like spin it in a way they want to spin it. It's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. I've told people all this stuff forever. I've told people this stuff forever. And I know I ain't wrong about it. I'm not wrong about it. Yep. Well, Jeffrey, I've seen plenty that think that, media stories have some validity when they really don't. I've seen some. It's ludicrous. But all right, y'all. I'm glad y'all came. I'm going to be getting off of here. I've been going a good hour or so. Mary, good to see you. And Jennifer, thank you for coming, my dear. And everybody, thank you. Brogan, I think I saw you earlier. Thank you for coming. Angry Scandinavian, of course. Thank you, Kathy and Jeffrey and Mandy and Aaron. Thank you, Aaron, for coming. Great to see you too. Everybody, thanks for coming. All right, y'all have a blessed night.